Cool. So now that we've gone over a bunch of basic material types and how to make them, and we went over, model organization, we're going to start taking this asset forward and really, go over what is my personal next step in the process. If I had just gotten this asset and I'm finished with my UV and model organization, the next step for me is going to be blocking out some basic shaders. And the reason we made all those tileable shaders is so that I can use them here, because that is something I like to do, is just grab a bunch of materials I already have made, toss them on. I can block out some color and just see really where we land at with this thing. So I know, general design-wise, the idea is that this is leather and metal. It's kind of a steampunky kind of vibe. This little, maybe not steam driven, but he's some sort of little robot that's been handmade, not machine made. So there's going to be some tool marks and scratches and dents, and he'll be a little bit dirty. The story for this asset is that, there's a little guy in a cave that's letting these birds go up to the surface with little notes in them. And so he's got his little compartment in here, and those little notes are going to go up to whoever he is delivering them to. And, so this is where I'm currently at. Just while I was getting prepared here, I wanted to make sure the lighting was a little bit more even, so I actually did a small change. I pulled the lights a little further away. And if you remember when we were setting up our Look Dev light rig, I wanted to modify the bunker. Let me get this saved here. So let's go ahead and save our image. You can see I've been doing all sorts of tests, making sure everything's sorted. So let's get our IPR rolling. And if I bounce up to my bunker, I did find a direction of this light that I'm sort of happy with. It's a little bit weird. I've got this image right back here. That's okay. I'm really looking at the lighting. And I modified Studio A, which is the one we were doing a lot of our material tests in. So I pulled these area lights a little further away, just so they had a little bit larger coverage of the white cyc, because I was getting a really dark shadow right here. You can see there's still a little bit of a shadow on that side, but just doing a little bit of tweaks for the model. And I modified Studio B a bit as well, because I actually I felt like the contrast in the color was so intense that it was very distracting, so I evened that out a little bit. I wanted to make sure this was a fairly neutral environment as well, with a fairly sharp shadow, so I could really see specular in a studio type of environment. And we have our sun and sky, which is the same. This is also a very important one for me because this asset is going to be going outside. And the first thing I want to do here, before we really start blocking out our shaders, is make one more light setup. And that's going to be a kind of nighttime setup. So I want to go in here and get my ground unhidden. So let's find our ground geo. There we go. And in this layer, let's go ahead and look through our, I also created a new camera, bird test cam, and that's going to be the main angle that gets created. So for this nighttime, it's kind of a nighttime, kind of interior. I wanted to make sure I knew what this asset looked like in candlelight, basically. So I'm going to go over to my environment override. I'm going to turn that on. And actually, sorry, just so that everything is working very well, I want to create a layer override and turn it on. And I want to create a override. Actually, just mid thought, I'm actually just going to turn this off. I'm going to use a light dome instead. So I'm going to create a new V-Ray light dome. And this light dome is, I'm actually just going to leave it hemispherical rather than a full cylinder, or sorry, full circle, full sphere, because I don't want any light bouncing off the ground. I really just want this to be an extremely dim, very deep blue that will be sort of the overlying darkness color. So if this was out in the night, there would be this kind of blue haze. And this is a bit stylized, I will admit. This isn't necessarily something you'd always want to be doing. And I can see, maybe I want to turn on spherical. I kind of like how it casts more shadows this way though, so we'll keep it as hemispherical. And I'm just going to make this color pretty blue here and pretty dark. And this is really, that's kind of what I'm getting at here. Maybe a little less saturated than that. But I really don't want a lot. And I'm going to leave it invisible because that color will start being more distracting. And I'm just going to adjust that color a little bit brighter until I get something, a very subtle amount of light coming from this. And you can always crank your color a little higher than you intend, and then you can use your intensity multiplier. So that's feeling kind of nice right in there. And that's it. That's the dome. And now I want to create just 2 point lights and, V-ray sphere lights. And these V-ray sphere lights are simply going to represent my candles. Let's turn off our history panel and we'll get this kind of half of our viewer here. And I'm going to make this extremely warm. So maybe even like 2000. And then we're going to crank this up a bit. And notice how I've got my test camera now. And so I'm making sure that my lights are angled in a way so that they're flattering. They're casting, you can see the core shadow in the object a bit. Here, let's get this cranked up a bit. So we'll set our radius to 2. That's feeling nice. And maybe the intensity multiplier can go up to 100. It's kind of interesting. Maybe even 200. So remember, I'm always trying to, and I'm missing my spheres as well, because I really wanted to see what that white sphere looked like. So let's go to our light. So here's our lighting aids. Let's bring those into our new render layer here. So here's my white, so that's feeling pretty good. The exposure of the white and 50% gray to this object are feeling nice. I'm actually just going to duplicate my candle light here, and we'll pull it kind of so that we get a little bit of a rim light. So that's kind of nice. And now I do want this to just be invisible. And maybe I want that to be a little further away, a little forward. So I'm looking for that edge right there is what I'm really looking for. So that's cool. So this would really be my candlelight, my dark world. Because again, this is kind of a story-driven lighting setup. And this is really all I need for now. I can always go in, duplicate these lights around if I want to. Maybe I want to have another one. That's kind of cool. Maybe even a fourth one out in front. So see, that's starting to flatten it out a little bit. But maybe something like that could be nice. And just thinking if my bird asset is traveling through a cave or some sort of tunnel, or is outside in the night, what that environment might look like. So that's really the main idea here. So I'm going to pull that key light a little bit away. I'm going to remove it a little bit back as well so I get a little bit more shaping. And I think I'm going to delete this other light that I created so I get a little bit more of that shadowing. Yeah, see, that's kind of cool. Great, so let's get our lights named. And so also the brightness in that dome is a little much. I think I want it to be a little more saturated and actually darker yet. There we go. So there's a hint of that darkness, but really the saturation of that candlelight should start taking over. But I do like there to be a little bit of fill. You can see if I just disable this, it loses some of that cool balance. So something like that just, evens it out in my mind a little bit. Great, so we'll call this night sky dome. And then we'll say candle 01. There we go. And this will be the night. And I'm just going to drop this. I'm going to stop my IPR and we'll get our file saved out here. And I'm going to make sure that this layer is created here. We'll call this night beauty. There we go. And we'll get this all reorganized. And so I'm going to bounce back to my master layer. I'm going to hide this whole group just to make sure that it's hidden across all render layers. And I'm going to reveal it in this render layer so that there's a keyframe set and kind of like an override so that that will only be around in this layer here. Wonderful. So that was just something, you know, as I was doing my planning, and, you know, I don't want you to ever think these are totally stuck. It's just important, you know, that if you modify it, that you have a really good reason to, and that generally speaking, you know, even though I moved some lights around, the intensities of those lights were rebalanced so that they fell right in line with all of the other ones again. And that's really the key here to make sure your shaders continue to work. Sweet, so let's bounce back to our master layer, and I'm going to import. Actually, I'm going to make sure that I'm just going to save here. I'm going to open up my Hypershade. There could be some junk laying around inside of it. So I just want to make sure that if I say delete unused nodes, that it wipes that stuff. Yeah, and so it looks like there was, in fact, some junk in there. And you can see I've got some V-Ray materials still. I'm not totally sure where those are getting attached to. Looks like that's actually the beak. Let me see where. I want to make sure I know where all my current shader. Oh, so that's the white cyc, so I should probably label that. And that's our white sphere, that's our chrome sphere, that's our gray sphere. And then this is probably our ground geo. Yeah, so I should get those labeled really quickly. So this is our ground material. This was our cyc material. I'm going to put light aid white. And then we've got light aid chrome. And then last but not least, we have light aid gray. There we go. So now everything is sorted and we're starting actually nice and fresh. So I'm going to start by importing some shaders here. So if you, inside of the work files directory, there's a new shader export folder. And I'm just going to import both one of the, this is a leather shader I exported from the leather demo, and also a metal shader I exported from the metal demo. And let's actually also import my leather shader. Great. And if I go and I look at my Hypershade. So this is where things can get a little complicated based off of how you want to set everything up. I'm already importing shaders, so I'm kind of creating a bit of a complex situation for myself here. Let's get a interior HDRI so we can see what that, okay, so here's our, if you remember, this is our rusty metal shader. And so this rusty metal shader, I want to map into those shading groups. So I may be reusing the same thing over and over again. I may want to map the blend material in. However I want to do this, I do want to be sure that I'm maintaining these shading groups though. These shading groups are going to be tied to my geometry, and I've already set this up in a very specific way so that they're tied to the UVs correctly. So the shells are going to export correctly when I go into Substance Painter. Now, this is where you have a lot of choices. So right off the bat here, I'm going to begin with the leather. And I know that my shading group for leather If I go here to the bird leather, this is all of the leather. And so I know that I can actually just map this material. So let me graph this. Sorry, this is so small here. So my leather material, I'm just going to swap in to my shading group for bird leather. And I'm going to actually delete that bird leather. And I'm just going to rename this bird leather MTL. There we go. So that's already one set up, ready to go. The rusty metal, so here, let's do our quick IPR so you can see. The rusty metal is a little trickier because that's going to be kind of going over everything. And you know, I don't know exactly what materials these are all going to be. This is going to be part of the exploration process. So I have a leather assigned, which is cool. And I know I want the beak to be kind of a brass color. So I'm going to start there. So I'm going to go ahead and get the kind of yellow-orange color and a lot of reflectivity. I'm wait for my IPR to catch up here. So that's a little too saturated, I think, and way too much diffuse. So we'll dial that down. And let's go ahead and unlock our Fresnel. Fresnel IOR, we're going to set that to maybe 3. And then we'll pull that reflection glossiness down. And that reflection color is going to be that nice, nice and bright brass color. Looking pretty good. Might be a little saturated for a brass. It's almost feeling a little too gold. So let's pull some of that back. Bring that a little closer to the orange side. That's better. Great. So cool. And then we've got our leg material. So I don't think I'm going to put too much. Well, there might be some rust on there. So maybe we should, well, we'll start with the body first though. So the body material, and again, I want to load up my node editor here. So we have our bird body shading group, and let's keep our node editor on one side and let's bring our hypershade over here. And so we've got our galvanized material. So I'm actually going to drag this over here. And I'm going to leave bird body MTL for right now. I am going to want to get everything named correctly. The way Substance Painter works is it will grab the shaders, and the shader name will be written into the OBJ, not the shading group, I believe. I could be wrong, but just in case, it's definitely better to just maintain the names. And so if I want to have 5 different shading groups all have the galvanized metal, I'm going to want to duplicate that 5 times and just get my shaders actually renamed. So for right now, I am just going to copy this, and I'm just going to delete it, get that galvanized metal in there, and just rename it like that. And let's tuck our hypershade out of the recording window for a second, and let's see what this is looking like on the body. Cool, so you can see the leather has definitely got some weird stuff going on with that tileable texture. So I can go in and just graph that real quick and work on that. So if you remember, we've got our V-Ray curvature map and also a series of, so here's our grunge right here. So I can work on that a little bit. And so this is our leather grunge, so I can tile that a little bit, set that to 3. This one's already at 5, so hopefully that 3 one will change that around a little bit. It did not, so I'm going to have to figure out where that's coming from. So it might actually be the one that's tiled 5 times. So let's try tiling that 8, see if that changes anything. And hopefully we can see an update there. So that did, you can see it got rid of some of the spottiness. The next step is actually going to be taking this to Photoshop to really fine tune the look of this stuff. So I'm not going to worry about it too much yet. It got some of that really major noise out though, which is good. So let's take a look at the eye. And actually, let's look at the head while we're at it. So I'm going to go ahead, no pun intended, I'm going to just keep this kind of a basic metal. So I'm just going to turn the specular way up, turn the diffuse down, get this IOR set up, maybe 2.2 and 2.5, so kind of a darker steel. And we'll lower that glossiness a bit. And so you can see with only 2.5, it's actually looking darker than the metal down here. So I do want to bring that up. I should probably look at what the galvanized metal is. That's looking nice. So that's matching now. And then I want to go in and let's get the rusty metal shader assigned on the wings and the tail. So I'm going to bring my tail shader up. I'm going to make sure that my render or my add to graph on create is in here. And now my rusty metal, get that up in here. So my rusty metal material, I'm going to use a couple times. So I don't want to duplicate the whole shader. I just want to duplicate with connections. So I can actually do this right in my hypershade. I can say duplicate with connections to network. And now this rusty metal 1, I'm going to call the bird tail material. Oops, I'm going to have to delete this first. And we'll get that in there, see how that's looking. And then I'm going to duplicate off one for the wings as well. We can actually just rename this the wing 1. So let's go ahead and find the bird wing. There we go. Graph that. Just going to copy this name, delete it. Get both of these in here. And reconnect. So it's coming along. I know it feels a little bit weird, but we are getting somewhere. So let me just go ahead and make this little full graph here, or full render rather. Actually, we'll stop the IPR and we'll just go ahead and do one quick render. So you can see we were having similar issues on the tileable texture that the rust has. So I can, it's one of those things where it's really up to you if you want to get in there and start messing with that. So if we go to our V-Ray blend, I'm just going to tile this maybe up to like 10 times. And as you can see, I've got really, maybe not 10, we'll try 5 first. And I'm just going to re-render this little chunk right here. And we'll see how that looks. Much better. It's feeling pretty cool. So last but not least, I want to get in there and do the feet. And on the feet too, I think I'm just going to give it I'm not going to worry about any textures right now. I'm just going to go ahead and drop the diffuse, crank up the reflection, give it an IOR, a little bit of glossiness, and we'll call that good. So I'm going to work on the eye a little bit here in 1 second, but I want to kind of reiterate that a lot of what I'm doing right now is just formulating a plan. This does not look amazing yet, and I'm not really intending for it to. I'm really trying to get something that I can bring into Photoshop that I can start painting on right away, and just, go ahead and see what I can get from it and start figuring out the full color palette and everything. Because even looking at this right now, I'm not sure about the tone of the brass. I'm not sure about the tone of the leather. And I want to mix and match some colors of metal and actually spend some time to design this guy. So that's really the next step for me. And let's see how he looks in some of the other environments before we take a peek at the eye shader. I think that'll be I think we can get that looking a little bit nicer. But let's go ahead and we'll save too. Probably a good time to save. And I'm gonna bounce into the backyard. Backyard's feeling kind of interesting. The more I look at this pattern on the leather, the more it really kind of drives me crazy. So I am just going to modify that real quick. And that it was, I believe, this grunge right here. I'm going to make this 15 tiles, and I'm going to really just kind of ease off of that amount. The goal here to just get less of that. Nice. So really just, I may have totally killed it and didn't think I wanted to do that. So there's a little bit of one right there, looks like. A little bit of that happening. We'll bring it a little bit back. So now we've got some over here, a little bit bigger. That's pretty cool. So that feels better. I'm happy about that. So it looks really nice in the backyard. I think I'll probably paint on it here because has some color in it. Feels kind of nice. But let's go ahead, and I do want to see what it looks like in some of the other lighting setups. So let's see what it looks like in the bunker. The bunker is definitely the weirdest one. So I'm really not taking the bunker too seriously right now. As I said, you definitely have to take it with a grain of salt because the value of these windows is like 100. So these reflections are bouncing up to like 8, even higher, 14. So not too worried about that one. Let's check out the harbor though. The harbor's pretty nice. See, that is very interesting. I'm actually really catching a crazy reflection off of the leather. So the leather is hitting this light right here that's pretty bright and reflecting onto the body. So, maybe I want to just see what this looks like if I rotate it around a little bit. Much better. So we're still getting some of that reflection, but we're getting a little bit nicer shape. And remember, I'm not changing the intensities of the lights. It's totally fine to move the lights around, but you really want to be careful changing the intensities of the lights because you want them to all stay dialed to one another. That's pretty cool. I think maybe it's not reflecting the leather, it's reflecting this giant red block right here. That could be part of it. Anyways, feels pretty nice. Studio A is, I believe, I can't remember if that's the hard one or the one we were in on the master layer. This is the master layer, so let's go bounce up to Studio B. Pretty cool. You can see I've definitely got this like empty spot in my reflection. This is one of the challenges of metallic objects. If you have an empty spot in your HDRI or in your environment, you're going to just reflect it right into there. So here's one of the important ones, the sun and sky, that magic hour kind of sunset. And it's looking beautiful. Last but not least, our new one. You guys can count how many times I say last but not least. It's probably a lot. I apologize for that. So this is kind of interesting, so because we're dealing with metal and reflections, the very dark environments are not the greatest for this. You're going to have to be really careful about your light placement and making sure it's reflecting in certain ways. This just goes to show you have to definitely keep that in mind. This didn't look so bad when it was just a gray shaded bird, but now that I've got all these metal shaders on it, it's feeling pretty weird. So I can, I'm going to redo my IPR just from the perspective. And I want to just kind of tumble around and see how it's looking in this same world here, because this is definitely one I'm a little concerned about right away. And I may want to actually still work on the lighting here. I'm not entirely sure. It is picking up some nice detail. It's kind of cool. From this angle, it looks nice because there are, I think, 2 lights, right? So, you know, again, it's back to that same issue where there's really, you have to be careful about what your metal objects are reflecting rather than how much of them is illuminated. So, you know, I may need to make sure I always have a light around my object here. So now I'm starting to catch some more of those shapes. There's definitely still a really weird reflection of darkness over here. And I'm just going to assume that this will work out okay. I kind of rushed this environment right now, so I'm not going to get too worried about it because I don't really have walls in here yet. So I could even, you know, I could place some. So let's just see what happens if I, you know, just in this environment here. Just give it something to reflect. Because it's really those areas. So see, yeah, it's doing something. So if he was in an interior space, you know, that's really the key here, is that if he's in an interior space with this type of candlelight, with these intensities, the shaders would feel okay. So I'm not going to get too wrapped up in this because it's feeling really nice in that sun and sky. It's feeling really nice in the studio. And it's feeling really nice in the backyard. So I'm going to say I need to continue to think about how to portray this lighting environment and not worry about it too much. So great. I'm going to bounce back over to the backyard and I'm going to turn on my perspective cam IPR so I can zoom in here. And I really want to see how this eye shader, the refraction, is working. So let's go ahead and see what we got. It's kind of interesting. It actually does feel like it's reflecting the leather. So we can test that. It's definitely got this kind of hue to it. So what if I just throw all of the leather pieces into a display layer? Oh, sorry, I already have them in the display layer. Perfect. So I'm going to turn off my leather group. And I just want to see if this kills that brown reflection. My render came up, but my leather is still in it, so I do need to restart my IPR. The IPR did not obey the display layer update. Interesting. So I'm not sure what's causing that. It's kind of funky that we're getting that kind of reddish hue. So let's check out the shader. Let's actually go to the other side too, because it might just be reflecting something. Oh yeah, I think it might just be reflecting something in the... you know, see, that has a little bit of a reddish tinge to it as well. So let's go to our attribute editor. Here's our glass shader. So there's diffuse on it. So that's almost definitely what it is. So I'm just going to kill the diffuse. That looks better. So that was that blue that I was after. So you can see I've got a little bit of blue in the reflection, or sorry, in the refraction. So let's bounce back over to the other side. It's feeling pretty cool. You can see I have 2 layers of glass. So this inner eye, actually that has diffuse as well. I'm going to kill that. So there's an inner eye that's refracting as well. And the inner eye is refracting just a sphere right now. So that sphere, I'm going to give that some reflection, some glossiness. IOR 5.5, cool. So now that, we may want to kill the diffuse on that. Great. And so I want to be able to see this kind of metallic sensor on the inside of the eye. And through those 2 lenses, I'll get some really interesting refraction. It's definitely not going to be easy to render, but if it looks really nice, I think it'll be good to go. So let's reveal both of our glass pieces again. And yeah, so now we're getting a really kind of cool highlight underneath of that. The outside lens doesn't have reflection, which is an issue. Much better. So now we're got that reflection going in there. And then the inner glass does have reflections. That one's good to go. tied to the refraction, and likewise up there. Nice. So you can see now it's looking much prettier. Wonderful. So cool. So that's really that. I don't want to spend tons more time than this right now. I'm going to stop this, close my outliner. I'm just going to bounce back to my bird test cam, and I'm going to do a full 1080p render. So let's set that in our render settings here. And I really just want to, like I was saying, just get this in. Let's bring our leather back on. I want to just bring this into Photoshop and start doing some experiments and really see what this is going to look like. See right off the bat, rendered the wrong shader or the wrong camera. And there we go. Now we're in a good spot. Stand by. So render came through. Let's get that blown up here and just move it. Get this set up. As you can see, tons of noise. So I'm letting you know that also the leather, I need to adjust the leather tileable texture, and I want to tile some of these metal shaders a little bit. So it's not looking so hot yet. I don't even really feel comfortable taking this to Photoshop because once I did this full res render, definitely realized there's still some work to be done. So I kind of jumped the gun there, but that's okay. So let's first go ahead, and I've got my leather here. So I'm going to tile that twice as much to 6. My grunge here will bring up to 5. And then this leather, that's the one on the underneath, will do to 3. My metal here, so we have the brushed texture. That should be tile. Yep, that tiles as well. So I'm going to do 4 and 2. And then we've got our grunge here, so I'm going to double that. We have our rust, which isn't tiled at all, so we'll put that to 4. We have a grunge here that's already at 5. We'll bump that up a little bit to 8. And I just know when I was looking at it that everything felt really inflated. That's really why I'm going in and doing this. And so that's cool. So that's looking good. So I do need to get my render settings situated. So I'm going to go into my image sampler. I'm going to raise up my max subdiv. We'll maybe do 16. We'll bring this threshold. 0.01 is good. And I think most of that noise is really coming from my shaders. So I'm just going to crank my min shading rate up to say 32. And let me just do one quick, the min shading rate will just smooth everything out kind of globally. So let me show that V-Ray frame buffer again. And I'm just going to do one quick test and we'll make sure it works okay. So you can see that, I definitely prefer to dial the shaders and lights individually, but that did the job for just this one test image, which is cool. It's definitely a lot slower, but that's fine. The only thing I forgot to do was adjust my galvanized metal shader. I only did the one on the legs and the tail and stuff. So I want to go in here and grab my galvanized metal shader and going to tile that maybe 4 times. And that grunge, we'll bump that up to say 5. And I can actually just test render the body again, just to make sure. I can actually include some of that stuff too. And I can just get a nice little preview before I pull the trigger on the whole thing. So this is still rendering out, and I actually feel like I've got too much noise happening in the galvanized, because he's supposed to be kind of small. He's not really a big bird. He's kind of, he could fit maybe like wingspan of 18 inches or so. So before that finishes rendering, also this is looking really, really clean. So I'm going to ease off on the min shading rate a little bit. And we'll try 16 and see how it looks. And then on that galvanized, I went up to 4 from 1. So we'll just knock that back down to 2. And we'll see how that looks. So you can see this is still this is rendering nicer. I'm happy with this, so I'm going to go ahead and pull the trigger on the big render, and I'll pause it until that's ready to go. So we'll stop that one, and we'll turn off our render region, and we'll let it rip. Great, so here's our render. It's looking very okay. It's not good, not great. We'll stick with that. I'm going to get this EXR saved out, so I'm going to go ahead and hit save, and go over to our images here, and we'll just call this Chapter 5 Material Blockout, so it matches the name of the files. And let me get Nuke open here. So I wanted to make sure everybody understands how to apply the LUT, because we were working with a LUT. So this is the sRGB image. So I do want to create a vector field node, and just go ahead and source that 1D LUT that we were using. And so you can see here, so by default, this is not going to work. I do want to put my color space in to Cineon, my color space out to sRGB. So that is matching our viewer. So that's cool. And if you wanted to, you could always, toss a grade on this, do anything that you needed to do. If you wanted to lift up some of those shadows a little bit, add a little bit of gamma, that's okay. You could actually do that before or after. Probably before is better, so it still rolls off the highlights the same way. And then we're just going to write that back out, and I'm just going to kick out, we'll go up to our look dev, images, working files, and we'll say material blockout, LUT applied, and we'll just save this as a TIFF, and just 8-bit, and we'll render that out. Cool, so I'm going to do some painting in Photoshop real quick. So here, let me take a crack at this. So sweet, so this is where we landed. Do a little bit of cleanup here. So this is the original, and you can see just really going in, and we can just break this down layer by layer here. So I'm just going to group this here. So this is our actual update. Okay, cool. So let's just bring this down. So I started out, let me turn off these 3 layers and turn off that one. So I just kind of gave myself a little bit of an idea of what I wanted to do here. I wanted to have a little bit of design going around there, figure out something here, paint some design here, and then I need to figure out, have some sort of pattern going around there. So I drew some lines for myself. So did this texture, and also a lot of this, you can see there's all sorts of stuff going on. I'm going to give you this PSD so you can kind of break it out and play around with it. And I didn't record it because there's way better people in the world that you can watch videos about Photoshop from than myself. So, but you can see a lot of what went into it. There's little things. I'll try and delete all of the layers so you can just, you can see I'll leave that in there. That's an experiment I left for I actually kind of like that, so I'll leave that on. For the little safe, the little lock. And so that was really going in and doing my best to figure out what the kind of texture and grime would look like. Substance Painter is going to be doing a lot of that already. So I didn't go too crazy with it. But you can see there's some scratches in there, general grime. I kind of like how dirty it is. And the big one here was the tone of the leather, the tone of the metal, adding this purple in here. I really liked where that purple was going. So if I find that somewhere, so here's the wings. Yeah, so right now I have it set to overlay. I'm actually going to even probably want to brighten that a little bit. So I'm going to lighten that. And it's really just kind of about this. I really like this purple. So I also created a layer right up here just called palette. And I just pulled lots of reference and I kind of gathered and brainstormed, and this was kind of what I wanted to land at. So I've got my brass, some brass tones that were pulled from a photograph. These purpley blue enamel were also just pulled from some photograph. and then some lights and darks that I just used to help myself paint around here. So I also did do a little bit of lighting, and this stuff is just really kind of getting some harmony in the image, so it's a little more pleasing to look at. This is really subtle, but I darkened down the eye just a tiny bit. And then this last part here has some additional stuff going on. So I wanted to, I mentioned the story of this asset is about a guy that's down in a cave releasing this bird up into the world. And so I wanted that to be representative. So there's a little, there's some waves on the side of this and a little boat and some stuff here, just some kind of etching into the metal. And this little boat and the waves, I wanted to be a kind of key part of this, where it would be an image that somebody on the surface would recognize and know that this was the bird coming from him. So that's a little story element that got worked in there. And so, yeah, that's where I landed right now. And the next step in this process is going to be getting this set up and brought into Substance Painter. So that's really exciting. Substance Painter is amazing. Like I said, so this this PSD will be, sorry, that was our leather PSD. So this PSD will be in the folder, so you can play around with it. Just by the way, one other thing I like to do, I turn on this hue saturation just so I can kind of see the overall value. You can see I've got some bright metals in the body, some darker areas, the leather. So I like looking at the black and white, just value study as well as the actual textures. But this is going to be my goal now going into Substance Painter. And I'm not going to get too hung up on the actual texture of things like the leather and all that, but I'm really, I'm feeling much better about just having something to go off of, and something to build up, and, some just basic idea of what I'm going to be doing. The one thing that I painted that I'm probably not going to be doing, maybe sometime in the future, but not for this video series, is I thought it would be cooler to have a little bit more model detail on these main 3 plates on the chest. So I painted something that I kind of liked, just some highlights and darks, but like I said, I'm not really going to get too hung up on that right now. But yeah, so that's really the basic idea. And so now we'll jump on over to our Substance Painter setup.